Now, as we've seen, Paul says we're no longer under the law of sin and death. This means we're no longer under a curse. We're no longer condemned by the law. This is because Hebrews says the law is seen as old. It's decaying, it's dying, it's ready to vanish away. It's described like being a corpse in a grave. Now, why is the law done away with? This is the big question. It's because Paul says it was contrary to us. It was against us. And so Jesus had it nailed to his cross. He says the law is what caused enmity with God, which means we were like God's enemies. But when Jesus came, he took away the enmity we had with God and gave us what we lawyers call right standing with God, or righteousness. So we're no longer enemies of God, but one with God. Peter tells us in Acts that the law caused everyone to fail who tried to live by it. He says no one who was righteous under the law. We're all guilty. And what the law does is to show us just how guilty and how sinful we are. If no one could ever live under the law successfully, what makes anyone today think that they can? If we think that we can do it, I think it's our pride and our ego that says we can. And you know, pride is one of those 7 deadly sins that's talked about in the Bible. Hebrews says the law was weak and unprofitable. It couldn't make anything good and perfect in God's eyes. The law produces a bad conscience in us. And when we do, even when we do good, because we know we could do better, right? The law causes us to perform what are called dead works, which are works of the flesh. But God leads us into good works if we're living in him. In the New Covenant Gospel, Hebrews says we should have no more conscience of sins. Well, if you live in the law, you're going to have a lot of conscience of sins. This is because the law is what causes God's wrath and anger to come upon us. But when he says there's no law, sin is not part of our thinking. There's an interesting picture in Hebrews 10 of the way God sees us if we continue to live by the law this side of the cross of Jesus. He says, quote, it's like trotting Jesus, the Son of God, under our feet. He also goes on to say, quote, it's counting the blood of Jesus as an unholy thing. Well, I wouldn't want God to see me like this. Would you want him to see you like this? I don't think so.